And good evening, and welcome everybody to Mishnah Mastery. Way we are back. It feels like it's been a while, a couple of weeks, I think. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be doing, please God, chapter 11 and chapter 12 of Masechet Menachot. Next week, we will have the final chapter of Menachot and move on to Chulin. So without further ado, there is our Mishnah up on the screen for you all. Hopefully the tech is working, the tech is ready, and here we go. We're going to be dealing with other public menachot to start with. We're going to be talking about the shtei halechem, which are the 2 loaves of bread for Shavuot, and lechem apanim, which were the 12 loaves of bread for every single week. The shtei halechem, which we've mentioned before, the 2 loaves for Shavuot, that would be the turning point at which new grains would be permitted to be used for sacrifices. And we're going to see that they were prepared separately. So it says the Mishnah out of chapter 11, Shtei halechem niloshos achas achas. The 2 loaves of bread were kneaded one by one, and each loaf was contained 1 isaron of flour, which I think we said was about 4.32 kilos. Lechem hapanim nilosh echad echad. The 12 loaves of bread were kneaded separately. V'ne'efa shnaim shnaim. But when they were baked 2 at a time. So each of the loaves of bread were 2 esronim or esronot, and they were baked 2 at a time. Uvitfus haya ose osam, and they were put into a mold. That's M-O-L-D. No, it's not. It's M-O-U-L-D. How do you spell the not moldy kind of mold? But to be able to make a formed shape of the lechem hapanim, they were baked in molds to preserve their shape. Ucheshehu radan, and when they needed to remove them, no snan but first, they would be put into a mold kadesh lo yiskalkalu, in order that their shape would not be ruined. I should have prepared a picture beforehand. I think it is subject to dispute as to what they look like, but they were essentially, imagine looking at it side on, it would be a U-shaped loaf with flaps over the top. So if you were looking at it side on, it's like that. And so it was put into a mold to be able to preserve its shape. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah base, Echad shtei halechem ve'echad lechem apanim. Both the shtei halechem for Shavuot and the lechem apanim for each week, they would not be doche Shabbos, meaning that we would not push off Shabbos in order to make sure that they would be done. So the Mishnah says, Lishasan va'arichasan bachutz, the kneading of their dough, va'arichasan, and forming them into shaping them into the shape of their loaves, bachutz, that could be done outside of the temple courtyard, va'afiyasan bifnim, but their baking had to take place within the confines of the Beis Hamikdash, ve'enon dochas es Shabbos, and their preparation would not override Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol ma'aseim bifnim, all of the procedures involved in their preparation would take place inside of the Azara, inside of the Beis Hamikdash, inside of the courtyard. And Rabbi Shimon says, La'olam have a ragil lomar, one should always be accustomed to say, should be careful to say, Shtei halechem ve'lechem apanim kasheros ba'azara, that the 2 loaves and the lechem apanim are fit if they are prepared in the temple courtyard, or kasheros b'beis pagi, and they're also fit for purpose and valid if they were prepared in beis pagi, which is outside the temple mount. And that's because, as we said, according to this opinion, they could be baked outside of the other. They could be. We're saying that they're baked outside of the Azara? I think so. Yes. So according to that last sheet of Rabbi Shimon, they could even be baked outside of the Azara, not just prepared. Mishnah Gimel. We sidetracked to talk about the chavite of the Kohen Gadol, the menachot of the Kohen Gadol, which could be Docha Shabbos, And as we've said previously, there were 6 loaves that would be brought in the morning and 6 loaves that would be brought in the afternoon. Says the Mishnah, Chavite Kohen Gadol, the pan offerings of the Kohen Gadol, Lishasan va'arichasan va'afiyasan bifnim. Their kneading, their shaping, and their baking all had to take place within the confines of the Beis Hamikdash, v'doichos es Shabbos, and they could override Shabbos in order to make sure that they were done. Tichunan v'herkedan einan doichos es Shabbos, but the grinding to be able to create the flour, the herkedan, which is the sifting of the flour, einan doichos es Shabbos. If you had not done that before Shabbos, it would not override the laws of Shabbos to be able to do that. Klal Omar Rabbi Akiva. There was a general principle taught by Rabbi Akiva, which we have seen also in Masechet Shabbat. You may recall, Kol malacha she'efshar la le'asos me'erev Shabbos. Any malacha which really would have been possible for you to do for the onset of Shabbos, eina doiches Shabbos. That would not push off. That would not override Shabbos. So there are stages to get the flour ready, which should be or could be done before Shabbos, and so if you haven't done them, then you can't do them. But if there are stages to be able to do the mincha offering, such as once it's in a kli sharetz, once it's in a holy vessel, so then you've got to make sure that it gets processed on that day, so it can't be done before Shabbos, which is why there are some stages, such as measuring the flour and the dough, etc., etc., which couldn't be done before Shabbos. So for she'ef shalala says Erev Shabbos, if there are things that were not possible to do on Erev Shabbos, those things, doiches Shabbos, those things will override and push off Shabbos, and you can do them. Mishnah Daled. Kol hamanachos yesh bahen ma'aseh kli bifnim. When it comes to all of the menachos, when it comes to all of the mincha offerings, yesh bahen ma'aseh kli bifnim ve'ein bahen ma'aseh kli b'chutz. There are things which would have to take place inside the temple courtyard because they involve the use of a kli sharetz, involve the use of a holy vessel. But anything that could take place outside of the temple courtyard would not involve the use of a kli sharetz. Ketzad. How is this the case? Shtei halechem. Am I in the right Mishnah? Yeah. Shtei halechem. When it comes to the 2 loaves of Shavuot, Arkan Shiva, V'rachban Arba'a, V'karnosehen Arba Etzba'os. So the dimensions of these 2 loaves, their length was 7 tfachim, their width was 4 tfachim, and they had protrusions on each of their corners, which were 4 finger breadths high. So they would accomplish all of this from 1 isaron of flour, 4.32 kilos of flour. So they were about 21 to 28 inches in length, 12 to 16 inches across, and then a little bit the width of 4 finger spans for the protrusions. Says the Mishnah, Lechem apanim, the 12 loaves of bread had double the amount of flour in each loaf. So Arkan Asara, their length was 10 tefachim, V'rachban Chamisha, and their width was 5 tefachim, V'karnosav Sheva Etzba'os, and their protrusions were 7 Etzba'os. Rabbi Yehuda says, Shalosite, in order that you shouldn't forget this, there's a siman, there's a mnemonic, which is Zadad Yahaz, Zayin Daled Daled, Yud Hey Zayin, indicating that for the Shtei HaLechem, it's 7 by 4 by 4, 7 by 4 tfachim with protrusion of 4 finger breadths, and 10 by 5 with 7 etzba'ot of protrusions. And that is why, no, never mind. Ben Zoma Omer, Ben Zoma says, V'nosata ala shulchan lechem panim lefanai tamid. The pasuk says Ben Zoma, the pasuk says, and you shall set upon the table the showbread before me always. From book of Shmos, chapter 25, verse 30. So the fact that it is called a lechem panim, we learn from here, sheyehe lo panim, that it should have a face. And so it has these sides to it, and it has the depressions to it, the shape to it, like a face has various features and bits. Some are sticking out, some are going in. That is why it's called the lechem hapanim, because it's almost like it has a face of some kind, protrusions and bits going in. Mishnah 5 is going to talk about how the lechem hapanim was arranged on the shulchan, the golden table that had the piles of the lechem hapanim. How was it arranged? So it's not so clear. The Torah says that the shulchan was 2 amot by 1 amah, and the temple yardstick for measuring an amah was 5 tfachim. So therefore, according to that, there would be the table would be 10 by 5 tfachim. Okay, and we said that the bread is 10 by 5. So there were 2 stacks of 6 breads, and each were 10 by 5. So if the table is 10 by 5, how were these 2 piles able to be there? So that is why they had to put the length of the bread over the width of the shulchan. Okay, so you're putting 7 tfachim over a width of 5 tfachim, which means that you're going to have you're putting 10 tfachim over a 5 tfachim space, which means you're going to have an overhang of 2.5 tfachim. And if you do that, and if you then fold over, right, because remember we said there's a shape to it. So if you're folding over these 2.5 tfachim, so now you have your loaves of bread stacking perfectly on that space. So there's no space between them according to Rabbi Yehuda. So that's just Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So let's see that inside. Hashulchan, the table, arko asara v'rachbo chamisha, it was 10 by 5. Lechem apanim, arkan asara v'rachban chamisha. The lechem apanim was also 10 by 5. No, saying arko keneged rachbo shel shulchan. So what they did was they put the length of the bread across the width of the table. V'chofel tfachayim u'mechetza mikana tfachayim u'mechetza mikana. Then you would fold over 2.5 tfachim, 2.5 handbreadths over the top. Nimtza arkom emale kol rachbo shel shulchan. So what you find is that the length of the bread fills the width of the table. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Meir says that yes, it was 2 amot by 1 amah, but the measurement for an amah was 6 tfachim. In which case the shulchan was 12 by 6 tfachim. Right, so you're still going to have overhanging bread. So, but this time, if you put the length of the bread across the width of the table, so you've got 10 tfachim going over 6 tfachim of width, which leaves you with 2 tfachim either side as an overhang. So you would fold over those 2 tfachim of the loaves of bread, which would make the stack 5 by 6, right? And that would leave 2 tefachim of space between these 2 stacks. So all very technical, and that would leave space for the 2 spoonfuls, 2 ladles of frankincense. They would be put in the space between these 2 stacks. Whereas according to Rabbi Yehuda, these 2 spoons, oh hello Daniel, these 2 spoonfuls of frankincense would be placed on top of the loaves of bread. So let's see Rabbi Meir's opinion over here. Says Rabbi Meir Omer, have we got the right place on here? Let's scroll down. Rabbi Meir Omer, Hashulchan arkosh ne'nasav v'rachbo shisha. The length of the table was 12 tfachim, and the width was 6 tfachim. Lechem apanim, the showbreads, arka asara v'rachbo chamisha, were 10 by 5. Nosen arko keneged rachba shel shulchan. So when you put the length of these breads over the width of the table, you would have an overhang of 2 tfachim on both sides. V'chofel tfachayim mikan tfachayim mikan. So we fold over these 2 handbreadths into the middle. Utfachayim revach ba'emtza, and then that leaves 2 tfachim of space in the middle of the table, in between these 2 stacks. Kadesha tehei ruach min hasheves beinehem, which would mean that the smell, I think, is that what we're saying? Where is it on screen? Oh, so that the wind will blow between them, and that will prevent the loaves from going moldy. We saw that there was a miracle that, like canteen challahs, they never went stale during the week. Abba Shaul, or like Shiraz challahs. Right, darling? Yeah. Abba Shaul Omer, Abba Shaul says, Sham ha'yuznosnin shnei v'zichin levona shel lechem apanim. That's where the 2 ladles, the 2 spoonfuls of frankincense were placed. Amrulah, say the Chachamim to him. V'halok v'ne'emar, does it not already say in Vayikra chapter 24 verse 7, V'nosata ala ma'areches levona zaka, that you shall place the frankincense upon the arrangements, meaning that they should be on the top of the stacks. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So how would you be putting it on the shulchan then, according to Rabbi Meir? Amar lehen, Abba Shaul says back to them, V'halok v'ne'emar, but does it not also say in Bamidbar chapter 2 verse 20, V'alav matei menasher, and alav, which would seem to say on it, right? That's how we would normally translate alav, would normally mean on it, would be the matei menasher, the tribe of Menashe, but it clearly doesn't mean on it, it means next to it, or next to him. So clearly we have an instance where al can mean next to. It doesn't just have to mean on top of. So that is why Rabbi Meir would say that the spoons can go in between the loaves of bread onto the space of the table in between the 2 stacks. Because al can also mean adjacent to or next to. Continuing with Mishnah Vav. So, going to be talking about the layout of the shulchan and the arrangement of the lechem hapanim. Says the Mishnah Vav. Arba'a sanifin shel zahav hayusham muftsalim meirashehen. So even though it's a flat service, there were 4. I've got it translated here as side posts. So I guess there was like a barrier. There were panels of gold around this surface, which would support the bread. 4 panels of gold, and they split up at their upper ends. Okay, shahayu somchin bahem shnaim l'sei dezer, shnaim l'sei dezer, so that the rods, which we're going to mention in a moment, would rest upon these panels, and it would support the 2 loaves of bread. That's the 2 stacks of bread. Ve'esrim mishmona kanim, and there were 28 rods, kachatzi kanechalu, that were like half pipes. So if you can imagine these 28 half pipes that would hold the breads, there would be 14 for each stack. 14 for each of the arrangements. The arrangement of these rods and the removal of these rods would not override Shabbos. Ela nichnas me'erev Shabbos v'shomtam v'nosnan la'arkos shel shulchan. Rather, before Shabbos, somebody would come in, a kohen would come in, and remove each of the rods from between the loaves. Okay, and then according to Rabbi Meir, he would place each rod along the length of the table, so that when you are placing the new loaves of bread onto the shulchan, these rods would be inserted, I guess, at the end of Shabbos. Says the Mishnah, Kol hakedim shehayu b'mikdash, all of the vessels that were in the Beis Hamikdash, so all of the different pieces of furniture, arkan la'arka shel bayis, they would be placed so that their length was running along the same direction as the length of the Beis Hamikdash. So the length of the Beis Hamikdash went east to west. So any piece of furniture, I guess, all of the shulchan, the mizbech, all of these different vessels that were used would be placed with their length also along the east to west. Would you call it an axis? I hope so. Otherwise, it sounds a bit silly. Mishnah Zion. Mishnah Zion. The shulchan was in the heichal, was in the inner sanctum, so to speak, before the holy of holies. There was this building that the shulchan was in, but that wasn't the only shulchan, right? There had to be some tables set up that would be where they put the loaves of bread when they are not on the golden shulchan. So the Mishnah says, Shnei shulchanos hayu ba'ulam. There were two tables that would be put in the ulam, which was the antechamber before the heichal, before this building. So shnei shulchanos hayu ba'ulam mibifnim al pesach habayis. They would be next to the entrance to the temple, next to the entrance to the heichal. Echad shel shayich ve'echad shel zahav. Echad shel shayish ve'echad shel zahav. One was made out of marble and one was made out of gold. The one to the right, as you were going in, would be made out of marble, and the one to the left, as you are coming out, so it would be on your right as you're coming out, that would be made out of gold. When you were bringing the next week's loaves of bread, they would be placed at the entrance on the right there, on the marble one. And then the left side, which is where you'd have the gold one, that's where you would put the loaves of bread as they're coming out from that previous week. Shimalin bakodesh v'lo moridin, because you can only elevate to a higher level and not downgrade. So marble is a lesser material than gold, and so as they go and they are placed on the golden table of the mizbeach, of the shulchan, you now can't come back and put them on marble, which was why you had a gold table on the outside, so that you could keep or maintain the same level of importance and not go down. Ve'echad shel zahav mibifnim, and then you would have your golden shulchan in the heichal itself. She'alav lechem hapanim tamid, where there would always be lechem hapanim. There would be no lapse whatsoever. Arba kohanim nichnasim. 4 kohanim would come in with these loaves of bread. Shnai biyadam shnei sadarim. Each would be carrying one of these. It would be two groups of 2 carrying these 2 stacks. No, let's try that one again. Two of these kohanim would be holding a stack of bread. Ushnai biyadam shnei bazichim, and 2 of them would be holding a ladle of frankincense. Varba makdimin lifnehem. And 4 kohanim would go ahead of them. Let's scroll down a little bit. Shnayim litol shnei sadarim, 2 who would remove the outgoing loaves of bread. Ushnayim litol shnei vazichim, and 2 who would remove the 2 ladles of frankincense. Hamachnisim omdim batzafon ufneihem ledarom. The ones coming in would stand in the north with their faces facing south. Hamotziin omdim badarom, and the ones coming out would stand on the south side with Neim Latzafon, and they would be facing north. Elu moshchin ve'elu manechim. One group would be putting down, and one group would be withdrawing. According to the first position in the Mishnah, they would literally slide the bread along, and you would never have a tefach of space on the shulchan which would be unoccupied, because they're literally, as they're carefully choreographing the removal with the replacement of these breads. That's according to the first position in the Mishnah. Shneimar, as it says in Shmot chapter 25, verse 30, Lefanai Tamid, has to always be there, has to always be before Hashem. Rabbi Yossi says, it's telling us that you can't have a day without bread, not that you can't have a single moment. So afilu elu notlin ve'elu manichin. One group can take off and the other group can place down. Afzor haisa tamid, and this would still be considered tamid, to always be on the table. Yotsu v'nasnu shulchan shel zahav shehaya ba'ulam. Then they would come out with these 12 loaves of bread from the previous week, and they would put them on the golden table which was in the ulam. Hiktiru habazichim. They would offer up the ladles of frankincense. V'achalos mischalkas lakohanim. And then the loaves of bread would be divided amongst the kohanim. Chal Yom Kippurim lias b'Shabbos. If Yom Kippur fell on this day, because it was done on Shabbos, so if Yom Kippur fell on Shabbos, hachalos mischalkos la'erev, then the loaves would be distributed on Erev Shabbos. No, they wouldn't. They would be distributed on Motzai Shabbos, on Saturday night, after Yom Kippur had finished. Chaliyos Erev Shabbos, if Yom Kippur fell on a Friday, which nowadays it can't, but once upon a time it could well have done, Sa'ir Shal Yom Kippurim Ne'echol La'erev, then the Sa'ir, the goat that was the sin offering of Yom Kippur, would be eaten on the Friday night. And habavlim ochlin asoka shehu chaim mipnei shedatan yafa. And since there was no possibility of cooking the meat, as you cannot cook on Yom Kippur or on Shabbos, the Babylonians, meaning the Kohanim who had emigrated from Bavel, they would eat it raw, due to the fact that they were, it says here, shedatan yafas, translates it as broad-minded. They were not particular, and they would eat the meat even when it was not cooked. All right, Mishnah Ches, new booklet, please. Okie dokie, Mishnah Ches. Let's scroll down. So when you would put the bread down, you had to also put the spoons down. But you must have the spoons on for a full Shabbos before you burn them. And so if they didn't get put down with the bread, you would have to wait till the next Shabbos to put them down. That's what we're going to see, hopefully, in Mishnah Ches. Sider es halechem b'Shabbos. If you put the bread down on Shabbos, ves habazichim la'achar Shabbos, and then you put the ladles, the bowls of frankincense down after Shabbos, v'hiktir es habazichim b'Shabbos, and then that next week you went and offered up the frankincense, the Mishnah says, psula, it is invalid. It's invalid because they hadn't been on for a full Shabbos before you got round to burning them. Ve'ein chayavin aleihem mishum pigul nosav v'tamei. But you would not be chayav for pigul because they were already disqualified, and you would not be violating nosar because they were already invalid. And with regards to tumah, if you were to consume them, there would be no chiyuv kares for that either. Sider es halechem, if you put down the loaves of bread, ve'es habazichin b'Shabbos, and you put the frankincense down on Shabbos as well, v'hikter es habazichin l'achar Shabbos, and then you went and burnt the frankincense straight after Shabbos, pasul, they would be disqualified. Again, because they hadn't because they were supposed to be burnt on a Shabbos. So pasul, they're disqualified. It's invalid. Ve'ein chayavin aleihem mishum pigul v'nosa v'tamei. And you would not be violating pigul, nosa, or tamei if you were to eat them. Sider salechem, if you placed the bread, ve'es habazichin, and the frankincense la'achar Shabbos, after Shabbos. So if you did, where am I on screen here, guys? Yeah, down here. Okay. So if we did the bread and the frankincense after Shabbos, v'hiktir es habazichin b'Shabbos, and then you went and burnt the frankincense on the subsequent Shabbos, then pasul, it would not be valid. So Ketzad Yaseh, what should you do then to make sure that we don't invalidate the bread? What do we do? Says the Mishnah, right? Because there could be instances where it wouldn't be set up until Sunday. So what do? Then you wait till the following Shabbos. So even though the bread will be on the table for over 7 days, there's not going to be anything wrong with that. As long as you burn the lavona on the Shabbos, then there's nothing wrong with that, even if it's the week later. Finally, Mishnah test to complete Perek Yud Aleph, the 11th Perek of Maseches Menachos. I hope this is all crystal clear for you guys, as it is for me. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah 11, Shtei Halechem Ne'echalos, the 2 loaves that would be eaten, Ein Pachos Mishnayim, they wouldn't be eaten less than 2 days. Velo yaser ashlosha, and not more than 3 days after they were baked, because the baking of the shtei lechem and the lechem apanim was not on Shabbos. So now we're going to see how this all works out. So how could it be that the shtei lechem would never be eaten less than 2 days and no more than 3 days after they were baked? Ketzad asks the Mishnah, how is this so? Ne'efos me'erev yontiv, they would generally be baked on erev Shavuos, v'ne'echalos b'yontiv, and they would be eaten on Shavuos, which is Lishnaim, which is the 2nd day after they were baked. Chal Yom Tov Lios Achar Shabbos. If Shavuos was occurring on a Sunday, then Ne'echalos L'Shosha, then they would be eaten on the 3rd day. They would be baked on the Friday, eaten on the Sunday, that's the 3rd day. Lechem Apanim, with regards to eating of the showbread, Ne'echal, when they got eaten, Ein Pachos Mitisha, would be no less than 9 days after baking, v'lo yaser ala chadasar, and it would be no more than 11 days after they were baked. Ketzad asks the Mishnah, how is this so? Ne'efar be'erev Shabbos, they would be baked on Friday, v'ne'echal b'Shabbos, and then the following week they would be eaten on that Shabbos, so that is Latisha. Chal Yom Tov liyos erev Shabbos, if it was Yom Tov on Friday, it would be baked on the Thursday, so ne'echal asara. So by the time you got round to eating it the following Shabbos, that would be the 10th day after baking. Shnei Yamim Tovim Shel Rosh Hashanah, if you have the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah occurring on Thursday and Friday, so then you have to bake them on the Wednesday, in which case, by the time you get round to eating them the following Shabbos, Ne'echal Achad Asar, that's already the 11th day after you bake them. Ve'eino doiche lo es Shabbos, ve'lo es Yom Tov. And the baking is not overriding Shabbos, and it's not overriding Yom Tov. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Askan. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, the deputy of the Kohanim, that the baking was Doiche Shabbos. Doiche as Yom Tov, it would push off a Yom Tov, ve'eno Doiche es Yom Tzom, but it wouldn't push off a fast day like Yom Kippur. Mazel tov, everybody. I'm completing Chapter 11. Any questions or comments before we move on to Chapter 12? Or was that so crystal clear that there is nothing that needs any clarification whatsoever? Here we go, guys, then. What a wonderful audience. Moving on to I know, well, sometimes they pipe up, not with a question, but they'll say no. But whatever. We do have an audience to the millions watching on YouTube. Thank you very much. Chapter 12, Mishnah Aleph. So, if an animal was tameh, if you had an animal sacrifice which became impure, you could redeem it and then you could buy another. But when a korban has sanctity for the mizbeach, then it can't be redeemed. And with regards to other things like flour and like the libations, so once they make it into a kli shares, then also if they became tameh, you've got no way of saving the situation, if I'm not mistaken. Says the Mishnah, Menachot, meal offerings, v'hanasachim, and the libations, shenit me'ud, that became impure, ad shelo kadshu b'kli, as long as they have not been put into a vessel yet, yesh lahim pidyon, you have a way of redeeming them and then replacing them with other things. Mishikadshu bakli. However, if they have already been put into a service vessel, ein lahem pidyon, then there's not going to be any way of redeeming them and fixing the situation. Ha'ophos, when it comes to birds, which may be missing a limb and so can't be used. The ha'etzim, or you've got wood which has become wormy and not fit for use. The halavona, or you've got frankincense. Uchlei shares, or you've got service vessels. Ein lahem pidyon, there's not going to be any possibility of redemption. Shalon ne'emar ela b'behema, because it's only for a behema, for an animal that has the prospect of redemption. But anything else is not going to have a prospect for redemption. Mishnah base. Ha'omer, a person who says, Harei alai b'machavas. He says that he's committing to bring a certain type of mincha. So in this instance, it's a mincha that's supposed to be brought in a flat, shallow pan. Vehevi b'mar cheshes. But he goes and he brings it in a deep pan instead. So should it be valid or should it be invalid? Right? Because he's committed to bringing one type, but now he's trying to bring a different type. B'mar cheshes, or he says that he's going to bring a meal offering which should be brought in a deep pan, vehevi b'machavas, and he brings it in a shallow pan instead. Masha hevi, the Mishnah says fundamentally what he has brought. It's still legitimate to bring a meal offering like that, but v'dei chavato lo yatsa, but he has not fulfilled his obligation because he has not brought the right type of mincha. If he says zo lahavi b'machavas vehevi b'mar cheshes, if he says that zo, this bit of flour, this isaron, yes, if this, he says that this isaron of flour is going to be brought in a flat pan, vehevi b'mar cheshes, and he goes and brings it in a deep pan, or the other way around, b'mar cheshes vehevi b'machavas, or he brings, he declares that he's going to bring it in a deep pan and he brings it in a flat pan. Hare zopsula. Then this is going to be disqualified because he has distinguished this precise isaron of flour to be brought in a particular way. And so since he has not done that, it is disqualified. What about Hare alai shnei esronim lahavi b'kli echad? What if he says he's going to bring 2 esronim of flour, but he's going to bring it in one vessel? So what would be the instance? If you were planning to bring multiple menachot, multiple meal offerings, they have to be brought in separate pans, separate containers. However, within the remit of one mincha, you could bring a mincha that would be comprised of multiple esronim of flour. You could actually bring up to 60 esronim of flour for one mincha in one vessel. Okay, so he says that he's going to bring 2 esronim of flour, and he's going to bring it in one kli. So that's going to indicate to us that he's planning to bring one mincha, and it's going to be comprised of this 2 esronim measurement of flour. What does he go and do? Vehevi b'shnei kelim. He goes and he brings it in 2 vessels, which would indicate that he's bringing 2 separate menachot of 1 isaron each, or vice versa. He declares that he's going to bring 2 esronim b'shnei chelim. He's going to bring them in 2 vessels. Vehevi b'kli echad, and he goes and he brings them in 1 vessel. Says the Mishnah, Masha hevi, what he has brought, he has brought. V'dei chavato lo yatsa, but he has not discharged his obligation. What if Elu lahavi b'kli echad? He says that these are going to be brought in 1 vessel, behavi b'shnei chelim, but he goes and brings them in 2 vessels. B'shnei chelim vehavi b'kli echad. Or he says that these are going to be brought in 2 vessels, and he goes and brings them in 1. Hare elu psulim. Then they are not going to be valid. What if he says Hare alai shnei esronim lahavi b'kli echad? What if he says, behold, it is going to be incumbent on me to bring 2 esronim of flour in 1 vessel, vehevi b'shnei kelim, and he goes and brings them in 2 vessels. So the Mishnah says, Amru lo bichli echad nadarta. They would say to him, I'm sorry, but you have vowed to bring them in one vessel. V'krivan bichli echad. Sorry, they would say to him, you have vowed. Well, where am I? Yeah. So then, so Amru lo bichli echad nadarta. You have said that you have vowed that you are going to bring them in one kli. So that's the difference over here. Hare olai means that he is swearing that he is going to bring them in one vessel. Hikrivan bichli echad. So if he brings them in one vessel, kasherim, it will be valid. Bishnei kalim, but if he brings it in two, psulim, then it's going to be disqualified because he had made an oath that he was going to bring it in a particular way. Hare olai shnei esronim. If a person makes an oath, makes a vow that he is going to bring two esronim, lahavi b'shnei kalim, and he says that he's going to bring them in two vessels, v'hevi b'kli echad, and then he goes and brings it in one. Amru lo, they're going to say to him, b'shnei kalim nadarta, you swore that you were going to bring it in two vessels. Hikrivan b'shnei kalim kasherim. So if he brings it in two vessels, kasherim, then it will be valid. Nasana b'kli echad. What if he then goes and he puts it all into one vessel? Says the Mishnah, kishtei menachos shenisaravu. Then you can treat it like two menachos which have been mixed. And so therefore, as long as they are still distinguishable, and you would be able to take out a kamitza from each isaron separately, the Mishnah says that's going to be okay. But if they become intermingled beyond recognition, then the Mishnah would also say that they are disqualified and they are possible. Mishnah Gimel. Hare alai mincha min ha'sa'ir. A person declares that they are going to bring a mincha offering from barley. There's just one problem. You can't bring a voluntary offering from barley. You can only bring it from wheat. So, yavi minachitim. He can still bring the mincha from wheat. And that is because maybe he didn't know that barley was wrong. Or if he knew that barley was wrong and he made the oath anyway, there was never any possibility of it ever being brought like that. So the mincha would still be brought, but he can bring it from wheat. What if he declares that he's going to bring a meal offering from kemach, which is coarse flour? Well, you can't. It can only be brought from soles, which is fine flour. So yavi soles. The Mishnah says he can still bring the offering from fine flour, even though he had sworn that he was going to do something else. What if below shemen and What if he swears, or if he vows that he's going to bring a mincha without oil and without frankincense? So if it's a voluntary mincha, then it has to be brought with oil and frankincense. So the Mishnah says, Yavi ima shemen ulevona. So then you should still bring a mincha with oil and frankincense. He won't be violating his oath. What if he makes a vow? Chatzi isaron. He's only going to bring half of an isaron, half of a tenth of an ephah. You can't. Yavi isaron shalem. So he still has to bring a whole, complete isaron. Isaron mechetza. What if he swears, he vows that he's going to bring an isaron and a half? So again, there's no such thing, but he has at least recognized that he has to bring at least an isaron. So the Mishnah says yavi shnaim. He now has to bring 2 tenths, 2 esronim, because he can't bring a half. So he now has to bring something that is comprised of 2 esronim. Rabbi Shimon says poter. You're going to be excused in all of these instances because you don't reinterpret what he has said. Shelo hisnadev kaderech hamisnadvin, because he did not pledge, he did not volunteer to bring what he is actually bringing. So if his oath cannot be fulfilled because it's not actually halachically possible, then there's no binding pledge on him to bring those things. Mishnah Daled, getting closer, ladies and gentlemen, to the end of chapter 12. Mishnah Daled, talking about the maximum mincha size in one vessel, which, as we've said, is 60 esronim. So we're going to see how that could end up even coming to fruition. Misnadev Adam mincha shel shishim isaron. If a person pledged to bring a mincha of 60 esronim, which and we'll just double check this, if an isaron is 4.32 kilos, that would mean that 60 esronim is 60 times 4.32. 4.32 liters. Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. 60 times 4 is 6 times 4 is 24. So it's 240. We're talking about over 240 liters of flour. Or 240 kilos of flour, really. So if a person pledged that amount for a mincha, umevi bichli echad, so he can pledge that amount and he can bring it all in one vessel. What a huge vessel, I guess that would be. Im Omar, if he said, Hare olai shishim ve'echad, that he pledges to bring 61 esronim, so now there's not one vessel that could accommodate that. So maybe shishim b'kli echad, ve'echad b'kli echad. So he would bring 60 in one vessel, and then he would bring one in a second vessel. Shekain sibur maybe b'yom tov harishon shochag, shechaliyos b'shabas, shishim ve'echad. As we see, and this is what they would do with the public offering brought on the first day of Sukkot, when the first day of Sukkot falls on Shabbos. So if you were bringing everything that you needed to bring on the first day of Sukkot when it occurs on Shabbos, so then the total amount of flour that would be needed is 61 esronim, in which case you'd be bringing 60 in one vessel. You could bring 60 in one vessel, and then one would be in another vessel. So there would be 14 sheep that were brought. If it's first day Sukkot on Shabbos, you would bring 14 sheep, each with one isaron. You would bring 2 rams, each with one isaron, and you'd be bringing 13 bulls, which would each have 3 esronim. So 39 for the 13 bulls, plus 2, 41, plus 14. 41 plus 14 is 50. Okay, so maybe the 2 rams had a different amount. But the 18 sheep, the 2 rams, and the 13 bulls would in total require 61 esronim of flour. So the Mishnah says, Dayor liyachid shehei pachos min hatzibur echad. It's sufficient for an individual that the maximum amount that he can bring is 1 isaron less than the maximum amount that the community can bring, which is why they could bring a mincha of 60. Amar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, V'halo elu laparim, ve'elu lakvasim, ve'enan nivlalim ze'im ze. Rabbi Shimon says, you can't mix together the flour of sheep and bulls. And so you can't have 60 all mixed together, says Rabbi Shimon. So he says, what's the relevance of bringing this up even? Because you can't mix these flours together. Ella ad shishim yecholim libalel. Really, what Rabbi Shimon says is, up until 60 isronim, you can mix 60 esronim with 1 log of oil. Beyond that threshold, it's just not really going to work. There's a cutoff point. Amrullah, the Chachamim said to him, Shishim nivlalim, 60 isaron can be mixed. Shishim ve'echad ein nivlalim, but you're saying that 61 can't be mixed? Amar lahem, he said, Kol midos Chachamim came. All the measures of the Chachamim are so, meaning that there are thresholds that the Chachamim dictate, and if it's a drop either way, so then it doesn't work. So the Mishnah gives some examples. But abayim sa'ah hu tovel, a person can immerse in a mikveh of 40 sa'ah. But arbim sa'ah chaser kartov, but if it's even lacking 1 kartov, 1 drop of water, 1/64th of a log, if it's lacking even that amount, eino yachol litbol bahem, then you can't immerse in this mikveh any longer. So that's what Rabbi Shimon is saying, is that the Chachamim have these thresholds, and beyond those thresholds, so a tiny bit less than 40 sa'ah, it already doesn't work. So which is why you can say that 60 esronim of flour can be mixed in with a log of oil, but 61 just won't work. Says the Mishnah, Ein misnadvin log shnaim v'chamisha. So the minimum wine offering that could be brought was 3 log of wine. You couldn't donate less than 3 log of wine. So the Mishnah says, Ein misnadvin log or shnaim. A person could not pledge a log of wine or even 2 logs of wine because the minimum was 3. Since the minimum was 3, v'chamisha, you also couldn't pledge 5 log of wine because there's no offering that could be accompanied by 5 log of wine. Aval misnadvin shlosha, you could pledge 3, va'arba'a, and you could pledge 4 because that was the amount that would, so 3 would be the minimum amount that would be brought with a sheep. 4 log of oil, of wine, I'm sorry, and a log we've said in the past, I need to keep looking these up constantly. A log is 0.6 of a liter, right? So 3 log would be brought with a sheep. Arba'ah, 4 could be brought with a ram. Shisha could be brought with a bull, but I guess it could also be 2 pledges of 3. Umishisha ulabala, and then when you've got 6 and above, so then you can have pledges that are going for 2 different libations. So 7 would be a combination of a 3 pledge and a 4 pledge. 8 could be a combination of a 4 pledge and a 4 pledge, etc., etc. So that is why you could be pledging these amounts of wine and it would be valid. Says the Mishnah, misnadvin yayin, you could pledge wine as an independent pledge, as an independent libation. Ve'ein misnadvin shemen, but you could never pledge oil on its own because it could never be burnt alone on the mizbeach, according to Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Rabbi Tarfon says misnadvin shemen. Rabbi Tarfon says you could pledge oil on its own. Amar Rabbi Tarfon says Rabbi Tarfon, just like wine can be pledged or can be brought as an obligation, or it can be brought as a nadava, as a voluntary offering. Af hashemen b'chova uvanadava. So too Rabbi Tarfon says oil can be brought as an obligation and it can be brought as a voluntary thing. Amalo Rabbi Akiva disagrees. Lo, if you want, you can say this with wine, because wine can be brought as its own obligation. Can you say this about oil, which is never brought as its own obligatory offering on its own? It can only come if it's mixed with flour. So that's why Rabbi Akiva disagrees with Rabbi Tarfon. As a concluding point to this Mishnah and to this chapter, Ein shnayim misnadvin isaron echad. 2 people cannot pledge 1 isaron, 1 meal offering together. They can't do that as partners. Aval misnadvin ola ushlamim. But 2 people could pledge a burnt offering and a peace offering. Uva'of, and with regards to an individual bird, afilu prida echas. They could even pledge to bring an individual bird on their own, not only as a pair. Mazel tov, ladies and gentlemen, on completing chapter 12, and that's all we have time for this week. So join us again next week as we finish Maseches Menachot together and move on to Maseches Chulin. In the meantime, have a wonderful and meaningful day.